Welcome back. In the previous video, what we looked at doing was adding these buttons onto our screen so that we could delete records from our table. And the the other thing that we would typically do is we would typically be able to edit records. So, if you think of CRUD in the programming sense, it's usually create, read, update, and delete. So we have right now, in terms of create, we have our ability to create a new record here. So we can add in, a new record. Okay, and we can see that it gets added here to our table. We can also see that if we go to log in here. If we go to Workbench and I look at my table. Okay, wow. I won't show you that right this second. Let's close the program. Hopefully this will work this time. Maybe not. Anyways, this is reading from our database, so we know that that is indeed working. And if I want to delete it, I can hit delete and it's gone. But what happens if I wanted to update some of these? So for example, this one here, the latest album. What if I wanted to create a genre for this? Right now I can't do that. I can't access this directly from our screen here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another column to our table called edit. And in here I'll create an edit button, sort of like the delete button. And the intent is that it'll bring us back to the it'll bring us back to this page, but this information will need to be pre-populated. And then when we hit save, it'll take us back to the albums page. So if we remember, when we did the delete, let's go into PHP Storm here, albums. So when we did the delete, the way that we set up that button is we created a reference, right? An href here to the deletealbums.php page. And then what we did is we added in this album ID equals, right? So that for each album, we're storing the album ID information in this URL. So when we click on this, it actually goes to the delete album page. And using the get array, we can pull out the album ID. That's how we uniquely identify each album. There we go. Looks like I can log in again. Okay. So I need to use the correct database. Okay, so there's our actual data set, right? So we're going to do something pretty much identical, except we're going to have this go back to our album details page. But what we're going to do is we're going to add in this question mark album ID equals. And that allows us to actually access this information on what the album ID is. It allows us to pass the information from screen to screen. So to do that, in my table header, so let me just scroll up a bit. So here in the table header, I'm going to add in another table header, and I'll call it edit. If I hit save, let's create a new. Okay. So there's our new album. So here's our updated page. And you can see what's happened is now our delete button. So we've added the extra table header, but we don't have any data in here. So our delete kind of went to the wrong column. So let's go down here and add more table data. Okay. And we're going to set it up just the same. So we'll make it an href. But this one we're going to go to album details.php. And we'll pass in the album ID Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so that passes in the album ID. And we need to close off our href. So if we hit save at this point and refresh, moves things over, but you can't see anything because we didn't give it a name. So if I type in the word edit, hit save, do an update, now you can see the word edit. But if I want to style it like a button, what I'm going to do is going to rely on the Bootstrap class to add some styling here. So actually, so I'm going to say class equals button, and let's make this one primary. Save. Refresh. And now it looks like a nice button. Now when we click on it, see how it comes back to the album details page? But now we know the actual album ID number. We still have to populate, we have to change how the album details page works, but we have access to the album ID number, so we can at least query our database and get this information. Right? If I pick a different one, you can see the album ID is different. So now what we have to do is update this album details page. So go to album details. And so what I'm going to do is, so in our album details page, sorry, just looking through what we have here. Oh yes, we have this set up so that we can connect to our database to populate the drop-down menu. But what we need to do is actually way up here at the top of the page, so here's our header. Before we build this form, we're going to need to actually get the information for our for our album, if it exists. So I'm going to create, I'm going to start this PHP tag here. And what I'm going to do we need to check the URL up here. So if this specifies album ID, it's an edit. And if it doesn't have that, then it's a new album, right? So we need to be able to differentiate between the two. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some variables for all of these items. So we have the get. Right? So if there is an album ID in that URL, the get array can pull it out. And then we're going to have some variables for title, year, artist. And I'm setting them all to null initially so that I can refer to them later. And so to decide if the album is an edit, we look at the album ID. So we say if not empty. Okay, so if the album ID is not empty, then we need to go to the database, right? So if the album ID is not empty, go to the database, look up the album ID, and then load the album information. So if it's not empty, then we need to do the old step 1, connect to the database. Step 2, create the SQL query. Step 4, close the DB connection. Let's do different step 4. Okay, so connect to the database. So we're going to say connection equals new PDO. Oh, MySQL host equals localhost, DB name equals PHP. Okay, create the SQL query. So again, it's always good to experiment. So I only want one row returned here. So I'm going to say select all the columns from albums where album ID equals. So for example, let's say we wanted this one here, right? So that's going to be album ID 104. So if I run that, I get that one album returned. That's what I want. So this is a good query. So I can go back to my PHP storm here and I say SQL equals, paste in the query. But here, I'll use album ID, right? And then we're going to prepare the SQL. So again, we're going to do command equals connection prepare SQL. And then we have to bind our parameters. Okay. And then the next step is we're going to have to run the command and fetch the results. So we're going to execute it, and then I'm going to say the album equals fetch. I'm going to use fetch instead of fetch all because fetch all is going to return an array of arrays, which I don't necessarily want. I just want okay, so now I have all my variables and I can update them here. So I'll just do a little copy here. So title will now be equal to album title. And the year is going to be equal to the album year. Actually, did we put a cover in this one? I can't remember. No, we didn't do cover. We'll get to images in a bit. So I'll just leave that out for now. Okay. Okay, so hit save. So now each of these variables is either null, in which case it's a new album, or they have values, in which case it's an edit situation. So when I come down here for populating these, what's different is so this is our form group, right? So it looks just like this. It has text, placeholder text in it. But what I can do is, so for example, the title, I can add in, so there's our required placeholder, but I can also add in something called the value. So I can say value equals, and in here, I'm going to actually do a little bit of PHP. So I can do a little opening and closing of the PHP here, and I'm going to say echo the title. Hit save. So let's back a bit here. So in this case, we have album ID 106. So if I hit save, I hit refresh this, that's album 106. The title was called Test. And if we look here, let's take a look at 106. Okay, so the title was called Test. Should be released in the year 1987. So I can go down. Here's the year released. And I'm going to say value equals open PHP tag, closing PHP tag, and I'm going to say echo the year. Save. Now if I hit refresh, not save it. Why is that not working? For some reason, it's not pulling out the year. So it's spelled the same, all lowercase. Let's just echo that to the screen just to see what we have. Okay, so it does get the correct value. Okay, I don't know why that's not populating. Oh, we'll come back to that one. And then the last thing here is the form group. Now this is an interesting one. So if we look at our value here, so in the form group, let's go to our albums page for a second. So in here, you can see, well, these defaulted to country. So it looks correct. Let's make it jazz. Hit save. Oh, yeah, we haven't updated this yet. So let's create a new one just to show what I'm talking about here. Interesting. Okay, so let's make this one rock. Hit save. So it's in here. Now if I go to edit this, when it comes in by default, it goes to country. And you'll probably even see this yourself sometimes on websites where you come in, you're like, hey, the drop down's not right. Now, the way to set this up is, so I can change it to reggae. I have to make some updates here, but essentially what has to happen here is when we're creating these echoes, we need to check if our current genre matches the genre that's being displayed, and then we can set that as selected. So let's go through and just I didn't set the genre up here, so let's do that. I'm going to call it actually genre picked, just to keep it a little different. So when we scroll down, so in this area here was where we connect to the database, we get all the genres, right? And then we're looping over them, and we're just displaying them inside option tags. So here we need to make a decision. So we need to say if the genre picked, okay, is equal to the genre that we're currently displaying. Okay, so if that's true, then then we could say echo. It's going to look almost the same. And we're going to have our option tags, right? But in here, I'm going to put in an additional thing called selected. Else. Okay, so save. So this way, if the genre that we've already picked, right, because it's an edit state, then we give it the status of selected, which will put it on top. Otherwise, we just put it inside of option tags. I hit save. Let's go back to our albums. So if this one says rock, if I hit edit, now when we come in, it shows rock, okay? So if I change that to rap, it's going to give us an error. Let's read the error. Okay, so incorrect integer value for column year at row 1. Okay, so for some reason, it does not like year. Let's find out why. Save album, line 32. Okay, so it doesn't think that it's getting an integer here for the year. So let's go back to our albums. Sorry, album details. And figure out what's going on with our year. So here we echoed it and it was okay. And here it didn't seem to be okay. Oh, is it? So we're missing a closing quote, perhaps. Try that. Okay, so there we reloaded, turn this into jazz, and now it's jazz. This one's country, change it to pop, change it to the year 2012, so it's called New Album by Goofy. there's a new album by Goofy. 2012 is Pop. So right now, unfortunately, we're still saving everything as a new album. It's not it's not truly editing it. So that's because in our Save Albums page, here, we treat everything as an insert. Everything's a new album. And what we need to do is we need to decide if it's a new album or not. And the way that we're going to do that is we're actually going to pass in the album ID. So if it has an album ID, then we know it is we know that it is an update. If it does not have an album ID, then it's going to be an insert. So what we're going to do is on the album details page, we're actually going to go down here right at the end, right before our button, and we're going to put in an invisible input field. And the way that we're going to do that, so right in here, so I'm going to say input, I'm going to say name equals album ID. ID is equal to album ID. And the value is going to be PHP statement here. And in here, I'm going to echo the album ID. Okay. Now, here's the interesting thing. I'm going to hit save for now. And I'll show you how to make this hidden in a second. So let's go in here and let's edit this. You see how it shows now 106 here? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to this, okay, in my input here, and I'm going to add in type equals hidden. So I want to hit refresh. You won't see it, but it's there, right? So when our post array will have the album ID if the album ID exists, right? So if I scroll to the top here, initially we tried to get it. If there's nothing there to get, it'll be null. So now in my Save Albums page, what I can do is up here, I can do something similar. I can say album ID equals, and I can check the post array to see if the album ID has been set. And if it has, I just need to make a little different SQL command. So what I'm going to say is if album ID, okay, so if not empty, okay, so if my album ID is not empty, then my SQL is going to be update. Oops. Update albums. Set title equal to title. Year equal to year. Artist equal to artist. Okay, so my SQL will look like this. It'll be update. Now, if that's not empty, if it is empty, if there is no value passed in for album ID, then my SQL will look like an insert into. Now everything else stays the same. So let's try this now. So let's update this test. So make it hip hop because I don't think we have any hip hop. I hit save. Oh, but I made them all hip hop now. And that's because in my update command, I forgot one important thing. I forgot to put in the album ID. So if you don't tell it what the album ID is, all of a sudden it's going to change all your records to the same. So I need an important thing here where I'm going to say where album ID equals and we'll have to pass in the album ID. And then down here where we're doing all of our bind parameters, I'm going to say if that's not empty, hit save. Let's try that again. So let's pick one album. Let's edit it. Let's make this one wrap. Let's change the year to 2011. Hit save. Okay, so now we can see just the one item was edited. I can delete still, nice and fine. If I want to create a new album, okay, I still have to deal with this. So it doesn't like undefined index album ID on line 19. So if I go to line 19, okay, I did this, and because this was blank, it's giving me an error. So what I can say is if not empty,